These are videos the FBI has worked hard to make sure you haven't seen. They're from the Google Drive account of Thomas Crooks, the man who on July 13th, 2024, showed up at the Butler County, Pennsylvania fairgrounds and tried to assassinate the frontrunner, Donald Trump. That day, Thomas Crooks came within a quarter inch of destroying this country. And yet, a year and a half later, we still know almost nothing about him or why he did it. That's because, for some reason, the FBI, even the current FBI, doesn't want us to know.
In this breakdown, we're diving into TYT versus Tucker Carlson, two mega giants locked in a battle over the narrative surrounding Thomas Crooks, the would-be assassin who nearly killed Donald Trump. We're looking at TYT's attempt to dismantle Tucker Carlson's storyline, the FBI's bizarre behavior, and the whiplash-inducing political transformation of Crooks himself. This is full contact commentary, calling out bias, hypocrisy, double standards, and media manipulation on both sides. And to be clear, TYT is winning the rhetorical fight here, mostly because Tucker's narrative has gaps big enough to drive a truck through, and TYT ruthlessly points them out. Now, let's find the truth.
Tucker Carlson and his team have uncovered some new information about Thomas Matthew Crooks, who he was, and what might have motivated his efforts in assassinating President Donald Trump, who at the time, of course, was a candidate. Now, luckily, he was unsuccessful in doing so, but there are still so many questions about this would-be assassin, and more importantly, why it is that it appears the FBI is withholding information from the public, even though there's no active investigation and there's certainly no trial, because the would-be assassin was shot and killed on the scene. Now, there has been radio silence from the intelligence community and the FBI in particular. So the evidence that Tucker Carlson's team produced seems to point to some sort of FBI cover-up. That might sound crazy, that might sound kooky, but once you get into this incredible video that Tucker Carlson put out, it really does shed light on how much is being withheld from the public and whether or not this is being investigated thoroughly, and it should be investigated thoroughly. So how did Tucker Carlson's team gain access to all the evidence that's displayed in this video? I think of it as more of a mini doc. Well, Tucker's team apparently received a tip from a source in late September. Now, since then, they had done everything they could to confirm that the information that was being shared with them was accurate, was real. So this source told Tucker's team that by using Thomas Crooks's phone number, which was published in documents obtained by America First Legal, he was able to gain access to Crooks's online accounts. So let's stop right there. The FBI told us, if you can remember, that Crooks didn't even really have much online activity.
This is the first major moment where TYT exposes a clear contradiction. The FBI said Crooks has basically no online footprint, yet Tucker uncovers a massive web of accounts. That's a red flag, and TYT is right to hammer it. But here's the bold truth. Both sides are using this contradiction for their own agendas. Tucker to push a cover-up narrative, TYT to frame Tucker as exploiting uncertainty. Tucker lists a mountain of accounts Crooks allegedly used: Snapchat, Venmo, PayPal under fake alias, Discord, multiple encrypted email servers, Gameplay, Chess.com, and even Colossal Microwave? TYT reaction: basically, how did the FBI miss this? Unless they wanted to. This is TYT's biggest strength in the video. They don't take Tucker's claim as face value, but they do highlight the legitimate weirdness in the FBI's behavior. And they're right. The FBI saying Crooks had almost no digital presence is either incompetent or dishonest. Neither answer is good. Then TYT digs into the YouTube comments Tucker pulled, and this part is extremely weird. Crooks went from ultra MAGA violent fantasies to anti-Trump rants in just a few months. TYT treats this like a psychological black box. Why did Crooks flip so hard? and so fast. Tucker frames the flip as suspicious. TYT frames the flip as unexplainable instability and FBI negligence. Both sides agree, this is weird as hell.
There was no trail online. And it turns out that's totally untrue. So phone numbers can be used to find more information on a subject through tools that are commonly used by private investigators. And so here's what Crooks's phone number led to in detail.
That phone number led our source to Thomas Crooks's primary email account, tmcrooks7@gmail.com. That in turn, he linked with more than a dozen other accounts. That list includes 2 foreign encrypted email accounts, AmericanGamer@gmx.com, a German website, and bcook@mailfence.com, a Belgian website. Crooks had a Snapchat, Tom_Crooks19, a Venmo account, Thomas-Crooks12, a PayPal account under the alias Rod Swanson, a Zelle registered as Thomas Crooks, as well as accounts on Discord, a Google Play account called Colossal Microwave, a Quizlet titled Thomas_Crooks, a chess.com with the same name, and 2 disabled Quora accounts under the handles Thomas Crooks8 and Thomas Crooks3. It turns out that Thomas Crooks was hardly an online ghost. He was active, and yet federal investigators lied and told us there was no trace of him online.
No trace of him online. A curious lie, super dishonest. Now, Tucker's team was also able to gather all the data from Crooks's deactivated YouTube account, and it was deactivated after the assassination attempt took place. And that included, by the way, his search history, his watch history, and more importantly, 737 public comments, which now shed light on his political views, which just flipped suddenly from one extreme to another. So buckle up, I'm about to take you on a little bit of a ride here. So Crooks's Google Drive is also linked to his YouTube account, which is how videos of Crooks were obtained by Tucker Carlson's team and used in this video. After verifying that the account that they were looking at was indeed that of Thomas Crooks, they found that he had swung from posting pro-Trump comments, sometimes pro-Trump comments that would advocate for violence on behalf of Trump, to suddenly anti-Trump comments and even considering violent acts against Donald Trump. So let's take a look at this next clip and then I'll give you more information.
They show a man who started out as a radical Trump supporter whose views on the president transformed, changed completely during COVID. The FBI lied about that fact and pretended that Crooks was a right-winger. At 11:35 p.m. on July 19th, 2019, in response to an MSNBC video, Crooks wrote, quote, Ilhan Omar and others are invaders and should honestly be killed and their dead bodies sent back. At 1:17 a.m. on July 20th, 2019, Crooks commented on a CNN video. He said Donald Trump was the literal definition of patriotism. 7 hours later, he commented on an MSNBC video. He wrote, I hope a quick, painful death to all the deplorable immigrants and anti-Trump congresswomen who don't deserve anything this country has given them. That evening, on a separate MSNBC video, he wrote, quote, every one of the Trump-hating Democrats deserve to have their heads chopped off and put on stakes for the world to see what happens when you America. These sorts of comments continued for months and became increasingly violent.
And they did become increasingly violent. He also posted a comment on YouTube in which he said, this is going to be blatantly racist, but I hope Trump has these people murdered. Other violent comments he posted on YouTube include, if any of the Democratic candidates win, they won't be in there for long because unlike the Dems, we have guns and lots of them. I mean, just horrific stuff. There's more. Let me give you another example. So 50 million Americans with AR-15s will make quick work of any blockades the government can put to protect the White House. And look, let's be clear. These comments did catch the attention of other people on YouTube. They were flagged by other YouTube users. So for instance, on September 30th of 2019, He wrote the following: most rioters don't bring assault rifles and body armor like we would, and we wouldn't be going to the streets, we'd be going to Washington. And then here's how the others responded, noticing that he keeps advocating for violence. One person says, law enforcement will thank you for grouping up and being so visible. It'll make your arrest so much simpler. Unfortunately, his arrest was not made simpler because he never was arrested and then attempted to assassinate a presidential candidate. Here's another example. Another person responded to Crook saying, you are on YouTube threatening to shoot government officials. I sure hope the FBI is monitoring social media for violent nutcases. Trump's cult is literally insane. So keep in mind that these pro-Trump comments, in which he's even advocating for violence on behalf of President Donald Trump, are taking place as late as late September 2019. By January 2020, a few months later, he swings in the complete opposite direction. Now, remember, January of 2020, you start seeing some headlines about the coronavirus pandemic. It wasn't called a pandemic then, that's for sure. And the shutdowns hadn't happened until March of 2020. So look, you could make the argument that he was on the far right, super supportive of Trump, and then COVID happens, he sees how Trump handles COVID and he turns on Trump. You can make that argument, except that's not what happened here. He started posting anti-Trump comments in January of 2020, and those comments became increasingly unhinged, okay? So let's get to some of those views right now. So here's an example. Actually, you know what? Let's go to the next clip because Tucker Carlson will kind of set it up and then I'll give you other examples.
In early 2020, Crook seemed to change radically. On January 23rd of that year, he referred to, quote, Trump's stupidity. They began to mock the concept of the deep state. He suggested it was a code word used by Trump supporters for, quote, anyone who disagrees with the right wing. Suddenly, he sounded like an MSNBC commentator. In February of 2020, he called out Trump supporters as, quote, too brainwashed to realize how dumb you are. I mean, literally, you guys sound like a cult at times. That same day, he called Trump and his supporters, quote, racist. It was an amazing transformation.
This is the point where any viewer is asking, how do you go from threatening violence for Trump to threatening violence against him in under 12 months? TYT calls it like a switch flipped. And honestly, that's the most accurate description. Something happened inside this guy's head, and the FBI's silence only fuels speculation. TYT then makes one of its strongest arguments. Crooks openly posted violent threads under his own name, repeatedly flagged by others, yet the FBI did nothing. This is where TYT absolutely destroys Tucker's narrative. Tucker wants the story to be, the FBI hid the truth because they're protecting anti-Trump radicals. TYT reframes it as, the FBI ignored both sides, the violent pro-Trump phase and the violent anti-Trump phase, which makes it look less like a political cover-up and more like a bureaucratic failure. And that hits harder. Then we get this mysterious commentator, Willie T.U., who encourages Crooks towards violence. Tucker makes this figure sound like a covert operative. TYT's angle, who the hell is this guy and why hasn't the FBI said a single word about him? It's one of the few places TYT and Tucker completely align. The FBI silence makes no sense.
And later, he did attack the right wing for how they responded to COVID, while chiding Tucker Carlson, by the way. Here's an example. And going to a Chinese New Year's party in America isn't putting you at risk for coronavirus because, believe it or not, viruses don't spread through race like Tucker Carlson probably told you. How did this guy go from being a hateful, racist bigot who wanted to see members of the squad murdered to now seemingly being a member of the left who is defending China as, you know, people start calling coronavirus the China virus and all of that. And it all happened in a few short months. Like he swung from a pretty significant extreme to what can only be described as, well, at this point, kind of mainstream left-wing thought. By August of 2020, though, Crook started to post YouTube comments that advocated for violence against the Trump government. So he wrote, in my opinion, the only way to fight the government is with terror or terrorism style attacks. Sneak a bomb into an essential building and set it off before anyone sees you. Track down any important people / politicians / military leaders, etc., and try to assassinate them. Any sort of head-to-head fight is suicide, and even ambush / surprise attacks likely aren't going to end well. So he went from advocating for violence on behalf of Donald Trump to now advocating for violence against Donald Trump. What happened? It's like a switch flipped, and I mean, there's no clarity in regard to like what led to this significant change in his political views. But more importantly, why are we learning about this from Tucker Carlson? Why aren't we learning about this from our own government officials, namely the FBI? It seems like they've just kind of shut this case and they've moved on. But we're talking about a guy who was driven to a point where he thought attempting to assassinate a presidential candidate made sense. And here's where things start to get pretty crazy, because on top of this, it looked like there was someone goading Crooks to commit acts of violence. Take a look.
At that point, a new character emerged into the conversation, a user named Willie Tepes, who started pressuring Crooks to commit violence. For example, quote, if a gun and a badge is all that is needed, then authority obviously comes from the barrel of a gun. We have more guns than they do. There is no way we can avoid a war at this point, so you better just get used to the idea. We have nothing to lose and everything to win. And the alternative, a global police state, is unacceptable. Nothing in life is simple, but that is no argument against doing it.
Perfect moment to let viewers absorb the fact that someone was actively goading Crooks towards violence, and nobody in law enforcement has acknowledged it. This raises real questions, not the partisan ones Tucker pushes. TYT leans in. Why wasn't this person investigated? Why did Crooks suddenly go dark after interacting with him? Those questions deserve answers. TYT then hits the hardest blow of the entire video. The FBI not only cremated Crooks' body 10 days after the assassination attempt, they also cleaned the crime scene themselves, destroying any potential forensic evidence. TYT calls that super strange. I'll go further. It's insane. It's indefensible. It's the exact opposite of standard procedure. Tucker wants this to mean FBI corruption. TYT reframes it as institutional incompetence and secrecy. And the argument lands better because it doesn't rely on a political motive. Then we get the absolute dumbest moment from the FBI. Officials insist there are ongoing prosecutions. TYT instantly slams that as blatant lie because Crooks is dead. This is where TYT crushes Tucker's rhetorically. Instead of suggesting some deep state plot, they simply highlight the incompetence, contradictions, and outright absurdity of the FBI statements. Sometimes the simplest criticism is the most devastating ones.
So who is this Willie Tepes? Unfortunately, we don't know. The FBI hasn't made any mention of him in public, although they certainly know he exists. Just days after the shooting, somebody screenshotted Tepes' YouTube account page, despite the fact he had very few followers. To the extent that he can be traced online now, you can find his username being used on a foreign Antifa website. Those sites link him to the Nordic Resistance Movement, which has been designated a terrorist group by the US State Department. That's all we know.
So is the FBI investigating that? Like who is that Willie Tepes guy? And why was this individual essentially encouraging Thomas Matthew Crooks to engage in political violence? I mean, these are questions that need to be answered for sure. And Crooks's online footprint, strangely and abruptly, ended after his encounter with this Tepes guy. So here's the other thing. You have all of these violent comments posted by a single individual all over these YouTube videos. We keep hearing about how we all need to be surveilled at all times to make sure we're all on our best behavior. When you have this guy openly posting, with his own name, by the way, all sorts of violent comments, and our intelligence community couldn't foil an assassination attempt? Isn't that weird? I find that super weird. So for all the Americans out there who might be, I don't know, fooled into thinking that your security and your safety is dependent on allowing Peter Thiel or Larry Ellison to surveil your every waking moment, consider the fact that even when there's threats of political violence in broad daylight, our intelligence community apparently does nothing about it, doesn't investigate it, doesn't look into it. And more importantly, after an assassination attempt has been committed, we just don't hear about the would-be assassin anymore. We hear, little bits and pieces about what his politics might have been. But here you have a clear picture of someone who went from one extreme to all of a sudden going to the complete other opposite extreme. And by the way, his search history from 2019 to mid-2020 is also telling. So he searched for Trump 700 times. Jack Ruby, the guy who assassinated Lee Harvey Oswald, searched for him as well. He also searched craziest chemical weapons, cars running over protesters, best places for mass shootings, mass shooting El Paso, Trump Civil War, Orlando shooting reaction, firing an AR-15 as fast as possible, how to make napalm, how to make Molotov cocktail, Oklahoma bombing, Hitler's speeches with subtitles, neo-Nazis, why gays need to go. I mean, it paints a picture of someone who has fallen into a dangerous mindset and ideology, whatever the ideology is. But again, the FBI is behaving in an incredibly strange way. And Kash Patel in particular has said some things on the record that I want to draw attention to. So 10 days after the assassination attempt, it turns out the FBI released Crooks's body to be cremated, which, kind of prevents further investigation from happening. So we learned about this on August 5th, apparently, due to Congressman and former police officer Clay Higgins from Louisiana going to Butler because he's like, what is going on here? I want to look into this for myself. That was when he learned, it turns out 10 days after the assassination attempt, the FBI sent Crooks's body for cremation. Now, the day that Crooks's body was cremated, this is also super interesting. The House Homeland Security and Oversight Committees had begun their own investigations into this assassination attempt. Could just be a coincidence. And this made it, again, impossible to verify certain things like the coroner and autopsy reports. So the FBI's activity at the scene itself also raises some questions. I didn't know about this. Let's take a look at what the FBI was up to.
Another notable detail is that photos from the day after the shooting show an FBI agent hosing down the site where Crooks died. High-level intelligence officials and congressional sources told us this is very strange, that the FBI usually hires out crime scene cleanup to third-party contractors. But in this case, they did it themselves, leaving no blood and no tissue for anyone else to analyze. In the photo, the agent's shirt says he's from the Technical Hazards Response Unit, a unit that collects traditional forensic evidence contaminated with hazardous materials.
That is strange. That is strange. And I mean, by the way, the same thing happened at the university in which Charlie Kirk was assassinated. I mean, why would you be in such a hurry to clean the crime scene and essentially destroy any possible evidence that might be there? Including tissue, including blood, that kind of stuff. And you would think that we'd get more clarity from FBI Director Kash Patel, considering the fact that he's the FBI director who was chosen by President Donald Trump to serve in that role, and Trump was the target of this would-be assassin. But no, instead we've gotten bald-faced lies. Here's what I mean.
How come we don't have more information on the assassination attempts on President Trump?
There's two reasons, two open, ongoing prosecutions.
What a baffling thing to say. Thomas Crooks is dead, of course. There was no trial against Thomas Crooks. And by the way, they weren't misspeaking. This wasn't an accident. We know that because the director of the FBI said the same thing once again under oath in front of Congress in September.
I'd like to ask you, sir, in the FBI, under your leadership, would you please respond to these questions and can you commit to doing that?
As soon as the trial's over.
What trial?
An absolutely brutal point in the video. The FBI's explanation collapses under its own weight, and TYT knows it. Finally, TYT closes with a point Tucker cannot make. Lack of transparency breeds conspiracy theories, and TYT's not wrong. If the FBI wanted to prevent speculation, they're doing the worst job imaginable. TYT's narrative is clear, strong, and consistent. The FBI's incompetence and secrecy created this mess, and the American people deserve answers. Compared to Tucker's version, which leans heavily on implication and light on evidence, TYT's critique is sharp, more grounded, and simply more credible.
Who's on trial? Thomas Matthew Crooks was killed on the scene. There is no trial. What is up with that lie? That is insane. So look, I'm not implying anything. I have no idea what's going on here. I don't know why the American people were kept in the dark. I don't know why President Donald Trump doesn't really seem motivated in getting more answers about this himself, considering the fact that he was the target of this assassination attempt. But what I do know is that when you don't have transparency and clarity from the very institutions that are supposed to be serving us, that's when conspiracy theories start to form, start to develop. So as much as people want to get angry at the so-called conspiracy theorists, can you really blame them when it really does appear that our institutions have been failing at their jobs and failing the American people? Look, for me, this isn't even a political thing. If Thomas Matthew Crooks had been successful that day, I don't know what would have happened in this country. It could have been a complete and utter disaster. And I'm very, very happy that he failed, but this latest reporting actually raises more questions. And the questions are directed specifically at the very government agency that is tasked with investigating this and returning real answers to the American people, including, by the way, the Trump administration, considering, again, Trump was the target of that assassination attempt.
This video isn't just TYT versus Tucker. It's a fight over who gets to define reality. And in this clip, TYT dominates the narrative, calling out contradictions with precision instead of dramatics. If you deliver the commentary with boldness, clarity, and attitude, viewers won't just watch, they'll stay hooked and watch forever. Thank you for watching and listening to our video. Please like and subscribe to our channel. We'll talk to you on the next video.